Hey guys, tonight we slip into the dusky folds of ancient Greece, where constellations shimmer like breadcrumbs scattered by the gods themselves. You're standing on a cool hillside beneath a wide, ink-dark sky, and above you, Centaurus, the half-man, half-horse archer, draws his celestial bow in eternal patience. But unlike other beasts of myth, this one's not here to eat you. He's a teacher, a healer, a guide, and frankly, he's been waiting a long time for you to pay attention. This isn't just another tale of gods throwing thunderbolts or mortals making bad decisions with swans. No, tonight we're unraveling the quiet, oddly poignant mystery of Chiron, the only centaur you'd actually want as your life coach. He's patient, wise, and doesn't even smell like a barnyard, which, considering the competition, is saying something. But beware, Greek mythology isn't known for playing fair. Chiron's story is full of paradoxes, sharp turns, and just a little immortal pain. You probably won't survive this as a centaur, but you will come out of it a little wiser. Maybe even ready to shoot a bow with your eyes closed. No promises, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift slightly in the grass, adjusting your weight as the ground cradles your back, and stare upward. Centaurus gleams above you, carved in flickering starlight. There's something both noble and tragic in that arrangement of lights, and you begin to wonder, why would anyone memorialize a centaur? Weren't they supposed to be wild, dangerous, always drunk, and swinging tree branches at wedding guests? Well, yes, most of them were, but not Chiron. You reach back into the murky folds of mythic memory, and there he is, not galloping into battle, but sitting calmly in a cave, teaching a half-god how to play the lyre, or stitching herbs into a poultice to draw out venom. He wasn't just different, he was practically a glitch in the matrix. And the Greeks, being who they were, had to come up with an origin story weird enough to explain it. Here's what they settled on. Imagine the god Cronus. Yes, the same one who swallowed his children to avoid being overthrown. Stalking through the woods in a somewhat romantic mood. He spots a nymph named Philyra and decides she looks just divine. Philyra, unfortunately, doesn't agree. She turns into a horse to escape his affections. Now, if you've ever had the misfortune of learning how gods solve rejection, you'll know what comes next is not super chill. Cronus transforms himself into a stallion, because of course he does, and the result of that chase is Chiron. Yes, Chiron is born not from two centaurs but from a god and a nymph, with the entire horse thing being an impromptu mid-chase development. Which makes him not quite divine, not quite beast, an in-between being that never asked for any of this. Fringe mythologists sometimes argue that Chiron was a remnant of an older, pre-Greek cultural figure. A wise forest spirit folded into mythology with some equestrian flair. Historians still debate whether centaurs originated purely as symbolic monsters or were exaggerated tribal enemies seen by early Greeks. Either way, Philyra takes one look at her newborn son, half human, half horse, full on what the heck, and essentially says nope. She begs the gods to change her into anything else. They grant her wish, and she becomes a linden tree, rooted and still. Abandoned at birth, Chiron grows up not in the wilds, but in a peculiar sort of custody. And here's where things start to glow a little golden. Apollo, the sun god with a to-do list that includes music, healing, prophecy, and light mansplaining, stumbles across this odd little full-boy hybrid. Maybe he senses potential. Maybe he feels pity. Or maybe, in some divine twist, he sees the value in raising someone not destined to betray or embarrass him. So Apollo raises Chiron. It's worth pausing on that. This is the god who literally cursed Cassandra for rejecting him, who flayed a satyr alive for losing a music contest. But with Chiron, he's gentle, encouraging. He teaches him how to pluck strings on the lyre until they weep, how to read omens in the stars, how to understand the heartbeat of the earth beneath his hooves. You imagine it. Young Chiron trotting awkwardly through a glade, a scroll in one hand, a spear in the other, mumbling herbal recipes under his breath while Apollo quizzes him on planetary alignments. Some scholars argue that this is a rare moment of divine atonement, that in mentoring Chiron, Apollo redeems a sliver of himself. Others suggest Chiron became a stand-in for the ideal teacher in Greek philosophy, wise, balanced, and removed from personal gain. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, Chiron is still young, still figuring out how to balance four hooves and a flute, still asking questions no centaur has ever bothered to ask. Like, what if we didn't drink ourselves into oblivion every solstice? Or, what if we taught our kids math instead of just wrestling bears? And the myths don't exactly record it, but you have to imagine he had moments of doubt. Imagine the loneliness of it. The only centaur in the world who wants to read Homer instead of headbutting someone into a tree. The only one who doesn't feel entirely horse or human or divine. But if there's one thing Greek myths love more than betrayal and murder, it's transformation. Not just physically, but inwardly. And Chiron is slowly transforming, becoming something new. A bridge between chaos and knowledge, between muscle and mind. And as the stars swirl overhead, you sense the world shifting around him. Something is coming. You don't have to imagine long before the story plunges into chaos again. Because Chiron's origin wasn't just about a divine love gone sideways. It was about violence, raw power, and cosmic fear. The kind of stuff that makes you want to double-check your locks and maybe keep a fire poker nearby. Let's rewind a little. Back before Chiron took his first clumsy steps on that rocky hillside. Cronus, the Titan dad who swallowed his own kids like it was a buffet, had just pulled off a maneuver straight out of a cosmic soap opera. He castrated his own father, Uranus. Yep, with a sickle. And from that violent, godly dismemberment, things started to get weird. In ancient Greek myth, Cronus's act is not just an over-the-top family dispute. It's a symbol of upheaval, of one generation violently overthrowing the last. From the blood and severed parts of Uranus, strange and powerful beings emerged. The Erinyes, furies of vengeance, giants, and even Aphrodite herself, rising from sea foam. So this isn't your average family drama. It's mythology's version of everything breaks loose. Now here's where it tangles into Chiron's story. Cronus, known for his suspiciously short temper and habit of swallowing offspring, ended up with Philyra, the nymph who decided to turn into a horse to escape his advances. And from that collision, literally divine and equine, Chiron was born. But unlike his rowdy, wild centaur cousins, he carried within him a strange duality, the brutality of the Titans and the gentleness of the gods. That mix made him a bit of an anomaly. And as you might expect from something born of both chaos and order, his life would be a tightrope walk between the two. What's especially curious, and kind of cool if you're into odd trivia, is that Chiron wasn't actually a centaur in the way most myths describe them. The other centaurs, as you might have heard, are mostly portrayed as wild, drunken, and prone to violent brawls. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of that one uncle who drinks too much and tells embarrassing stories at family dinners. But Chiron? He was wise, calm, and almost philosopher-like. It's no accident that historians still argue whether he was a symbolic figure representing knowledge and healing, rather than just another half-horse party animal. Speaking of horses and symbolism, the Greeks often linked horses to nobility, war, and even the underworld. That means Chiron's equine half wasn't just a physical trait, but also a signifier of his deeper connection to nature, war, and mystery. He was the perfect teacher because he bridged worlds, the divine and the mortal, the wild and the civilized. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In some versions of the myth, Chiron's mother, Philyra, was ashamed of his half-horse appearance and abandoned him. But instead of growing bitter, Chiron embraced his uniqueness and became a mentor to heroes, gods, and mortals alike. That's like if your weirdest feature made you the coolest person in the room. In many ways, Chiron's story reflects an ancient Greek belief that true wisdom and teaching come from understanding both sides of a conflict, the beast within and the reason that tames it. This theme is so strong that some scholars suggest Chiron's myth was a way for Greeks to explore the balance between civilization and nature, intellect and instinct. Historians still debate whether this centaur was originally a local god absorbed into Greek culture or a purely literary invention meant to inspire heroism. Either way, his beginning is tangled in violence and vulnerability, setting the stage for a life that would redefine what it meant to be both powerful and kind. And now, with that messy origin behind him, you can almost hear the distant footsteps of Apollo, who will soon enter Chiron's life with a promise to change everything. But before that, imagine young Chiron standing on the edge of the wild, caught between a savage past and a future none of the gods could have predicted. The world was waiting for a centaur who could teach, not just fight, who could heal, not just wound. And if you look up again at the stars, you'll see the flicker of that promise in the constellation still named for him. You're probably thinking all centaurs are just one big horse party gone wrong, right? That's the stereotype hammered into every mythic muscle-bound nightmare you've ever heard. But Chiron? He's the total exception. You'd swear he had his own separate myth license, issued with a stern warning and a bag of herbal remedies. While the other centaurs were busy wrestling, drinking too much wine, and occasionally terrorizing nearby villages, Chiron took a decidedly different path. He was born with a keen mind, a calm spirit, and an unusual sense of self-awareness that separated him from the herd. It's like he was the only one who read the manual while the rest were busy lighting campfires on their hooves. Here's the thing. Chiron's unique status wasn't just about being part god, part horse. It was about what that meant socially. Unlike the centaurs notorious for their unruly behavior, Chiron was marked by wisdom, civility, and an almost human-like ability to teach and heal. You could say he was the original teacher's pet of Greek mythology, except his classmates were some of the biggest heroes of their age. Imagine growing up with a body that screams wild animal, but a mind that craves philosophy and music. That's Chiron's dilemma. And it wasn't easy. The myths suggest he felt isolated, aware that he didn't quite fit with the chaotic centaur pack. But instead of retreating into bitterness or wildness, he embraced his difference. He sought knowledge and mastered arts uncommon to his kind, like medicine, astrology, and music. What's fascinating is that many ancient writers emphasized his gentle nature and reluctance to indulge in the centaur's usual rowdiness. While others might have thrown a wild party or two in the woods, Chiron was probably the one calmly reading a scroll by the fire, humming a tune on his lyre. Historians still argue whether this portrayal of Chiron developed because Greeks wanted to create a figure of balanced virtue, or if it's a reflection of some lost older tradition where centaurs symbolize something more nuanced than just savagery. After all, myths often evolve, absorbing layers of meaning from different cultures and times. Here's a quirky detail. Unlike his centaur cousins, Chiron was said to be immortal, or at least long-lived, possibly because of his divine bloodline. But immortality wasn't all it's cracked up to be. While others gambled with death and lived fast, Chiron carried the weight of knowledge, responsibility, and a profound awareness of mortality's limits despite his own. This heightened consciousness is what made him an exceptional mentor. If you're going to teach heroes, you need to understand pain, endurance, and sacrifice. Chiron embodied all of those traits, quietly preparing for a role no centaur had ever held before. The mythic tradition even credits him with founding the first medical school, where he passed down knowledge of healing herbs and treatments, basically ancient Greek house calls before house calls were cool. This added another layer to his character. Not just a teacher of warriors, but a healer of wounds, both physical and spiritual. You can almost picture the scene. Chiron patiently tending to a young Achilles's grazed knee or explaining the virtues of a particular herb to a future king. The wildness in his body never fully tamed, but directed toward purpose rather than chaos. And that brings up a little-known but fascinating scholarly debate. Some think Chiron was a symbol for the taming of natural instincts through education and discipline, reflecting Greek ideals about civilization's triumph over barbarism. Others argue he was a liminal figure, forever caught between two worlds, neither fully beast nor fully god, embodying the complexity of human nature itself. So, as you follow him through this phase of self-discovery and growing wisdom, remember that Chiron's story is less about what he looks like and more about who he chooses to be. A teacher who redefines what it means to be a centaur in a world that expects chaos. And with that, you sense the wind shifting. Because here comes Apollo, the god who will ignite the spark that turns Chiron from an outsider into a legend. You're standing at the edge of a sun-dappled forest when Apollo arrives, graceful, radiant, and wielding more talents than a multi-tool in a survival kit. The god of music, healing, prophecy, and occasional divine mic drops takes one look at young Chiron and decides, yeah, this one's worth mentoring. Not the usual fate for a half-horse, half-man. But then again, Apollo's tastes and protégés tend to lean toward the exceptional. It's hard to imagine the partnership wasn't a bit of a cosmic odd couple scenario. Apollo, with his golden lyre and sun-kissed glow, and Chiron, with his 4 hooves and fur, yet strangely calm demeanor. The two were like yin and yang, fire and earth, but somehow balanced perfectly. Apollo didn't just teach Chiron how to strum a harp or cure poison with herbs. He introduced him to prophecy, the art of seeing beyond the veil of time. Imagine sitting around with the god of oracles himself, trying to decode cryptic dreams and star patterns that could mean the difference between life and death. That kind of training wasn't for the faint-hearted. But there's a lighter side to this divine mentorship too. Picture Apollo nudging Chiron to loosen up, maybe a few harp lessons peppered with teasing remarks about his serious nature. Come on, big guy, lighten up. Even a centaur needs a good laugh now and then. And maybe Chiron, with a dry wit, replying, I'd prefer not to lose my dignity while hoofing it. One of the quirkiest tidbits about this apprenticeship is that Chiron supposedly learned not just medicine and music but also how to use the bow and arrow with deadly precision. Skills that would serve him and his future pupils well. It's no coincidence that the constellation Centaurus holds a bow, aimed forever at the sky. Apollo's influence is profound here, not only imparting skills but shaping Chiron's philosophy, balancing the body's strength with the mind's wisdom. This is where you begin to see why Chiron isn't your typical wild centaur. He's a cultivated blend of divinity and discipline. Historians still argue whether Chiron's education under Apollo reflects ancient Greek ideas about the transmission of divine knowledge, or if it's a narrative device to elevate Chiron's status among mortals and gods alike. Either way, Apollo's role is pivotal, turning Chiron from a curiosity into a figure of reverence. And you can almost hear the gentle hum of a lyre echoing through the forest, mixing with the rustle of leaves and distant bird calls. A soundtrack to a friendship that would outlast many lifetimes. What's even more fascinating is that Apollo, god of light and rationality, chose to mentor a creature who embodied both chaos and order. Their relationship suggests that true wisdom requires embracing contradictions, not ignoring them. So, as you watch Chiron absorbing Apollo's lessons, you start to realize that this centaur's path isn't just about survival but transformation. From wild stallion to sage healer, from misunderstood outsider to revered mentor. And soon enough, that transformation will ripple outwards, shaping heroes, demigods, and myths that would echo through eternity. You step lightly into the clearing where Chiron begins his true calling. Teaching. Not just any teaching, but the kind that shapes destinies. Imagine him surrounded by some of the most famous figures in Greek myth, the future Achilles, Jason, and even the wise Asclepius, whose name would later be synonymous with healing itself. Chiron is more than just a tutor. He's a mentor to legends, a figure whose patience and wisdom guide heroes on the razor's edge between glory and disaster. This is where the myth truly breathes, Chiron's legacy as the ultimate teacher. Unlike other centaurs, whose brawls and drinking binges filled the tales of drunken chaos, Chiron's pupils are groomed with discipline, knowledge, and kindness. You almost expect him to have a no horsing around sign posted somewhere, though in reality, his centaur nature probably made that a bit redundant. Picture young Achilles, the famously fiery warrior, under Chiron's watchful eye. The centaur teaches him not only how to wield a spear or ride a horse, but also about strategy, ethics, and the subtle art of healing wounds, both physical and emotional. That's not your everyday battlefield curriculum. And Jason, future leader of the Argonauts, absorbs Chiron's lessons with the same hungry curiosity, preparing for adventures no one could imagine. What's fascinating here is that Chiron's role as a teacher wasn't limited to combat or physical skills. He was also a master of medicine and herbal lore, a trait that set him apart in a culture that often equated strength with brute force. Ancient medical texts suggest that knowledge of healing was deeply intertwined with spiritual understanding, a tradition Chiron embodied fully. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some stories say Chiron was the first to teach the use of surgery and bandaging, making him a kind of ancient Greek doctor with hooves. It's a far cry from the usual centaur stereotype of wildness and violence. Yet, despite his revered status, Chiron's life was far from perfect. The centaur's immortality, usually a blessing, turned into a burden. Immortal, yes, but trapped in a mortal world. And later, in a tragic twist, wounded by a poisoned arrow that caused him unbearable pain he could never heal. Scholars still debate whether this story was meant as a metaphor for the suffering of knowledge or an allegory for the limits of immortality. And this is where Chiron's myth deepens. He isn't just a wise teacher. He's a tragic figure embodying sacrifice. Some versions tell us that his wound was inflicted accidentally during a battle between other centaurs and heroes, a reminder that even wisdom can't always escape chaos. The tragedy culminates with Chiron voluntarily giving up his immortality to free Prometheus, another titan known for suffering on humanity's behalf. It's a profound moment, Chiron choosing to end his eternal life for the sake of compassion, cementing his role not just as teacher but as selfless hero. Historians still argue over whether this sacrifice was added later to the myth or was always central to Chiron's character. Either way, it adds a layer of depth to a figure often overshadowed by more flamboyant gods and monsters. You start to see Chiron not just as a mythic teacher but as a symbol of the human struggle. The pursuit of knowledge, the pain that sometimes accompanies it, and the ultimate sacrifice for others. As the forest around you darkens with twilight, you sense that Chiron's story is more than ancient legend. It's a timeless echo of what it means to guide, to heal, and sometimes to suffer for those you care about.